Today, I'm going to be looking into the history of Cedar Point, where it all started, and what the foundation of the thrills we know today to be. Cedar Point was to undergo many changes and phases as it formed what we know today as the best amusement park in the world. Today, Cedar Point is owned and operated by Cedar Fair Industries, who also has several parks around the United States. So without further ado, let's dive in. Starting off, Cedar Point opened in 1870 and is currently the second oldest operating amusement park today. Located on the Lake Erie shore, Cedar Point was originally used for hunting and fishing for the emerging middle class toward the 19th century. This peninsula had an abundance of cedar trees, so it was called the Cedar Point Peninsula. Sandusky at the time featured an important shipping harbor and two railroads, which transformed into a major economic center over the next 3 decades. Also during the Civil War, the peninsula was used to defend a prison for Confederate soldiers on Johnson's Island. Johnson's Island is located 2 miles off of Cedar Point and 3 miles off of Sandusky. Soon, in 1882, Benjamin F. Dewell and Captain William Slackford soon leased the land on the peninsula. These men built bathhouses, a beach walkway, and a dance hall. Each year, they expanded the attraction for middle-class vacationers. The first ride at Cedar Point was soon built, and it was the water toboggan ride that launched riders into Lake Erie in 1890. Soon, electricity was installed in Cedar Point in 1891. Thus came the Switchback Railway, which opened in 1892 at a staggering 25 feet and an entire 10 miles an hour. 1897 soon rolled around, and Cedar Point was purchased by representatives of the Lake Erie and Western Railroad for $256,000. The result of this purchase formed the Cedar Point Pleasure Resort Company. George A. Boekling was the manager as this company came to arise. The peninsula was soon transformed from a picnic ground to a nationally recognized amusement park and resort destination. The second roller coaster was built in 1897 and was called the Figure 8 Toboggan. It was then later renamed the Racer. Soon after Boekling's death, Edward Smith took over the park. Not very many expansions happened to the park in the 1930s due to the Depression. One of the few rides that was placed was the Tumble Bug, which was a flat ride like the Scrambler or the Monster. And towards the end of World War II, Cedar Point needed major financial help. Many of the rides and attractions were down and out for the count, and they needed to be repaired as soon as possible. During this time, the Cedar Point Causeway was installed and is still in use today. The causeway is the long road from Cedar Point to the mainland that connects the two pieces of land. Let's jump to the 1960s when Cedar Point began to thrive with new ideas and attractions. As the 60s emerged, the idea of season passes began to come up. In 1960, Cedar Point was going to be transformed into a Disneyland amusement center. However, those plans fell flat on its face. In 1964, Blue Streak was constructed by Philadelphia Toboggan Company and is the oldest operating coaster at Cedar Point today. This coaster was named after a local high school sport mascot, the Sandusky Blue Streaks. Afterwards, in 1969, came along the Cedar Creek Mine Ride built by Aerodynamics. This coaster is the second oldest operating coaster in the park. Soon, the 100th anniversary of Cedar Point rolled around in 1970, and the Centennial Theater was built on the main midway. Robert L. Munger Jr. was the president of Cedar Point at the time. In 1976, the coaster Corkscrew was built, and it was the first coaster to be built to have over 3 inversions. Following Corkscrew came along Gemini in 1978. Built by Aerodynamics, this racer coaster debuted as the fastest and steepest coaster in the world. Wilderness Run also made its debut in 1979 and was the first coaster of its manufacturer, Intamin Rides. In 1986, Munger stepped down from the presidency of Cedar Point due to health issues. His successor was Richard Kinzel. During this time, Intamin produced Thunder Canyon, which was a white water rafting ride in 1986. From 1989 to 2011 came an extensive era of new rides and coasters in all shapes and sizes. From the first Plank and Blue Streak to the last Bolt and Valraven, the coasters you know and like today are shaped from the foundational history of Cedar Point. Here are some, but not all, of the historic world-breaking coasters that go down in history as some of the best coasters in the world today. In 1989, Magnum XL 200 opened as the first coaster over 200 feet. 1991, Mean Streak opened and it was the once tallest and fastest wooden coaster in the world. 1996, Mantis, now known as Rougarou, debuted as the tallest, fastest, and steepest stand-up coaster in the world. Cool fact, the original name for Mantis was going to be Banshee, but that name went to the inverted coaster in Kings Island. In 2000, Millennium Force was so big, it created a new kind of coaster called the Giga Coaster, and Giga means it's a coaster over 300 feet. In 2003, Dragster opened as the tallest and fastest coaster in the world. Fact, it also used to have a tail, but it was removed in 2005 due to an excessive amount of rollbacks. And also in 2005, Max Air opened as one of the 2 Frisbee rides in the world. Its cousin is in Kings Island and is known as Durelium. In 2006, Skyhawk opened as the world's largest swing ride. Today, Cedar Point thrives as one of the best amusement parks in the world. Tony Clark is currently the general manager of Cedar Point. In the decade of the 2010s, Gatekeeper, Valraven, and Rougarou opened in 2013, 2015, and 2017. And on September 16th of 2016, Mean Street gave its final ride, but the ride structure has not been destroyed yet. What could this mean? What do you think will happen to the Mean Streak? But that's all I have for you today, so thanks for watching, and ride on.